Hello everybody, this is Krista and welcome back to Adventures in Metaphysics. Now today, I want to delve into a topic that I've been wanting to, I suppose, start a discussion on for a bit now, but I've been a bit nervous to do it, and that is how my ADHD brain affects my tarot practice. Now, we're going to start with a disclaimer. And that is that by no means am I meaning to come off as the ADHD expert, because I'm not, or that this is the hard list of how you should read tarot if you have ADHD, or even like these are the only symptoms that people with ADHD have, or that this is the only experience. By no means am I meaning any of that. All I want to do here is to share my own experience, and hopefully maybe it's relatable to others, or it offers something, or again, we can start a discussion if you have some tips or anything of the sort. I just think it's an interesting topic that I've been thinking about. And again, we're learning together is my point, because I was diagnosed officially with ADHD last October, November, one of those. Obviously, this is a lifelong thing I've been living with, but consciously so, it's only been a matter of months. And since then, I've sort of subconsciously been altering how I've been learning and reading tarot to suit my needs and how my brain works. And it's just something I've been thinking about over the past few weeks, and I just was so blown away kind of pointing out all these things that I've started to do differently as a way of just kind of accepting myself and accepting just the way I need to do things and what works best for me, which goes beyond, anyone just having ADHD. I think we all are gonna have ways that things work better for us, but this time around, I'm specifically going to talk about ADHD because that is my experience. But of course, even if you do not have that, you're welcome to participate in this conversation. So I'm going to kind of go through some different topics, I think. I kind of want to make this a bit of a series because I think it just, if you are neurodivergent in any way, it affects your whole life. It affects everything you do because that's just who you are. That's how you think, that's how your brain works. So there's a lot that I feel like we could talk about. Today, though, I want to start with the big thing I've been really thinking about and how it affects reading for myself and how I've created this new routine that's been really working for me for the past few months. And again, it just clicked that the adjustments I made were to sort of work with my ADHD instead of how long I've been spending kind of working against it, because I just didn't realize that's what was going on. Anyway, I feel like I'm gonna ramble in this video. I'm a little nervous because again, I don't want to come off preachy by any means. Again, I'm just sharing my experience. Some of this maybe you'll find helpful, or you just know it doesn't work for you, and that's cool too. But if I'm looking down, I have my list ready so that I kind of can keep myself on task here. So this is going to be a bit more of a casual chat we're having while you just listen to my stream of conscious thoughts. But I wanted to start off with a very, very, very non-encapsulating definition or sort of explanation of what ADHD is and what causes it. And it is caused by low levels of dopamine, which is something that I never realized. I didn't know that ADHD was due to any sort of chemical imbalance. And dopamine is that kind of that happy chemical where we get it and it gives us that burst of happy, that burst of excitement. And so it affects not just our mood, though, I have come to find out through some research, but also cognition, attention, working memory, and learning new things. That one really drove home for me. Learning new things being affected by low dopamine levels, because I've never had an easy time learning new things, especially something that feels really big and extensive, just like tarot is. And so when I was first learning how to read tarot, I fell into that self-comparison trap that we all fall into from time to time, just feeling bad that I felt like I was having a really hard time remembering the pictures and the card meanings, and I've not even really delved too far into the symbolism and anything like that because I just have a hard time retaining information like that. While I think it's super interesting, I've gotten to a point where I understand all the cards, but we have to work slowly. And I think that's something important to point out because, again, we fall into those self-comparisons, and I felt really embarrassed that I was still having to use my books. And whether you have ADHD or not, neurodivergent or not, using your books is not a bad thing. It is nothing to be embarrassed about. Guidebooks are always going to have something to add. You're never going to come to this 100% full knowledge of tarot because that's not the point. The point is that it's created by people about kind of these common themes and archetypes we see throughout our days and our lives, and there's going to be just a million and one constantly changing ways to see that and new perspectives to learn. You can come to your own ideas about it, which is super cool, but each book is always going to have something to add. At least that's my opinion. But even if you're looking at it because you can't remember, that is nothing to be embarrassed about, which I know is easier said than done, because sometimes I still get a little embarrassed when I pull, say, this morning, I pulled the Seven of Swords, and I just completely blanked out, and I was like, what does that card mean again? And so I looked at my book, and I got the quick reminder, and it jogged my memory, and I was like, okay, now I remember what that was. But even if I had no idea, that would have been okay. So that's something I wanted to point out, because that's something I spent a really long time feeling bad about, was having to rely so heavily on my books and guidebooks. You can even see, I keep my kitchen table tarot out all of the time because it's my favorite book to sort of look up the meanings in. And another thing, because a lot of decks have these really nice full guidebooks. I'm looking at some of them right here. So like the Everyday Witch, we get this really full, nice color guidebook where each card has like a page of meaning. And sometimes that is overwhelming to try and consume that information. Again, because it's hard to keep your attention on it. It's hard to retain information. If I'm ever accidentally saying you, I realize I'm saying you in that sentence, but I'm still like talking about my own experience. I'm not trying to put anything on anyone else. I feel like I'm gonna be nervous through this whole video, so we're gonna try to stop being so nervous. Anyway, it's also okay to just check the keywords, because that's another thing, is then when I became okay reading the guidebook and realized that, like, no, it's a good thing, it's gonna, like, build on your knowledge, if anything else. Then I felt bad if I just had the capacity that day to read the keywords, and that was it. Because a lot of the times I can manage the keywords, and that's it. And that's okay too. So I thought that would be kind of an interesting place to start with in terms of reading for yourself, because you have to learn how to read, I suppose, before you can start doing so. Sorry, this is gonna be a bit like, this might be a bit blabbery, but anyway. So the other thing that I have found to be very helpful is the fact that I have a routine for myself when it comes to reading my cards. And this isn't gonna look the same for everyone, and it's something that's taken me a while to figure out, because routine does not come naturally to me. I am not good at organizing, I'm not good at time management, that's just things about how my brain works. So while it craves routine, it craves stability, it's not easy for me to maintain because my brain is going to very easily get bored, because if it notices we're not getting dopamine from this anymore, nothing seems new and exciting, we don't want to do it. Because that's the big thing, is that the best way to keep my attention is if it's something that I'm really interested in and it's kind of giving me those dopamine hits. So if something becomes kind of like I'm in a rut and stale in a way, while that may work for a lot of people, it's not going to ever work for me. I'm gonna lose interest and stop doing it altogether. Which has happened with a lot of different routines I've tried to set up, where I try and make these hard rules for myself with all of these strict guidelines, and we're gonna use this deck with this notebook, and it's just not gonna work because those rules eventually are going to feel old. Which I'm hoping that doesn't sound like too harsh, but I wanted to talk about my routine a little bit because I've discovered a way for myself to build a routine that I come to every single day that allows for enough change from day to day that it's something I'm always excited to do, and I never feel bored with it. And it's been months. It's been like months I've been doing this, so it's pretty tried and true. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how I go about reading my daily cards. So something that I set up for myself is I have a little space. You can see this is kind of my altar space here, but what you're clipped to is my reading desk, and it's kind of filled with the same little trinkets and crystals and candles and all of these things that I kind of have ritualized for myself. It's kind of like I do the same thing every day, but just with a little bit of change. And while I feel like to some this may look insanely cluttered, and it seems counterintuitive that like, how does having all these little bits of things around you help you pay attention? But what I've discovered is that by having objects around me that are visually pleasing to me keeps my attention, because while I'm doing my reading, it's not distracting because I know it's there, but my brain can kind of jump around to all the things around me and get those dopamine hits. I'm hoping that makes some sense how I explain that, but it's not distracting, again, because I set them all up. I know what they all are, but it gives me enough to look at where I can shift my focus without actually losing focus, if that makes sense. I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of talking and talking here. Hopefully this makes sense to someone. So, I'm going to show a clip actually of my desk. I think we'll do that because then maybe that'll make some more sense. Okay, I wanted to turn you around for a second to see the inside of my reading desk. So I can pull my cards right on here, but then all in here, I've got all these different little trinkets of just things I've collected over lots of time that don't necessarily need to have a permanent space, and they're things that I can easily switch out with other things when I feel like it. But as I was saying, when I'm reading my cards over here, while I'm shuffling, I can kind of just be looking over here, and it's not distracting to me because I'm used to them, but there's things for my brain to kind of bounce around to again, supply those dopamine hits and that almost simulating change, if that makes sense. So, but again, I will sometimes like physically switch these things out every once in a while just to make it feel fresh and new, but I have found that making things as visually pleasing for myself as possible really helps to get me just to even want to approach this space, to do that reading, and just keep my attention while I'm doing it. Does it work perfectly? No, because I'll talk about it a little more, but I still do tend to lose my focus while I'm doing my readings, but I feel like the first big step is is usually getting myself to do something consistently. That's usually the big challenge. And so having things and spaces that I really enjoy and again are visually pleasing and make sense to me really gets me to kind of do the thing, you know? Okay, so I'm gonna keep going on this thought train I'm having of how I kind of simulate novelty for myself, because that's a big thing with ADHD, is that you're going to get the most dopamine, and we all experience this. You get the biggest amount of dopamine hits from things that are new and novel and shiny and exciting. You know, that's just gonna be the best thing for that. So I've kind of worked my way around to simulate that for myself so that I can build this routine and keep myself consistent while sort of pleasing my brain, if that makes sense. So the next way that I do that is that, I mean, as you all know, I am certainly a collector of things and certainly a collector of decks. And that is really helpful to me. I don't know, I love doing the tags and like thinking about like, okay, if I only had to keep one deck, like this would be it. And do I think I technically could do it? Yes, I could. But I do think if I had one singular deck that I would eventually get bored of it and probably stop being so consistent with reading, which is something that I really obviously love to do. So this is not me by any means saying that you need to go and buy all of these decks or have like multiple decks. I think even just having 2 though, to switch around. So my tip is that, or something that's been working for me and has always worked for me, because again, people with ADHD are natural collectors anyway, so I would be curious, if you have ADHD, do you also collect decks? Because I'm kind of curious to know. Because I know that is kind of an unofficial like habit associated with ADHD, is just like liking to collect things. So something that's really helpful to me, anyway, is that, you know, obviously I like to collect decks, so I have a bunch to choose from. But to save myself from the overwhelm or the pull to just take on too many or take on too many at once, which is a personal definition, too many is entirely up to you. You'll know what feels right and what doesn't, you know? Anyway, so that's not to say that there's any magic number or bad numbers or good numbers. Spiel aside. Spiel? What I do. And this has been a bit new of an addition. Usually I keep all of my decks in here, and I would sit in front of it in the morning, and usually I use an oracle and a tarot deck, and I would just pick. But I've been finding that feel like I have a harder time sort of going deeper with decks when I kind of have all of the ones I have to choose from. Because again, I like change, so the odds that I use the same deck 2 days in a row, even within the same week, is rare. Because I want the change. Like, that's really all it comes down to. So what I've done is I now pick 4 or 5 decks to be my decks of the week. I used to do the month, and that became very, very hard for me. I picked more than 4 or 5. I probably had like around 8 that I would work with for the month. But that kind of created a space that didn't allow for enough change for my brain personally, I guess. It was too long of a time span. And I kind of felt like it got to a point where my brain wasn't making sense of that span of time, and it would just start to feel like a really long time, and I would almost start to dread working with the decks I picked by no fault of them, and they're decks that I love and still have, but I would dread working with them because I just felt like they were around too long, if that makes sense. And then I would get really stressed by like picking the ones for the month because again, my brain perceived that as like a really long time. So we've switched it to a week, and that's been working a lot better for me. So I usually pick around, let's see, this week we had 3 tarots and 2 oracles, which kind of tends to be the decks I pick. 2 oracles, 3 tarots, just depending. And having this number for some reason allows for like the perfect number of combinations where from Monday to Monday, which is when I do my switch, sometimes Sunday, I'm not getting bored. I still feel like I'm getting something new, but I also feel like I'm getting to know the decks I picked a lot better than I was. So that has been really helpful for me. Having just decks to switch around again to simulate that novelty, because of course we don't, or I don't want to fall into the trap of buying decks just because I'm craving the novelty. Which is not to say that like, I'm not sure exactly how I'm trying to phrase that. Because obviously like I enjoy trying out new decks and I don't think it's any sort of shameful thing to buy them, but for me personally, I like to make sure I'm putting in a lot of thought and there's a reason I'm bringing something in. And I guess to say that my impulsivity comes in when I am craving something novel. That's where I experience that symptom. So to avoid that, I kind of come up with these ways that simulate the novelty so I don't feel as tempted to like go out and purchase it, if that makes sense. Okay, I think the final thing I want to talk about when it comes to ADHD and kind of how I've created this tarot routine for myself when it comes to reading for myself is that it took me a while to figure out the best way that I wanted to record my readings and journal a bit about them. I put a lot of pressure on myself at first to, one, keep handwritten notebooks, which I love notebooks. And I totally have the tendency to keep getting a new notebook and like using only half of an old one and then just like having this clutter of notebooks, which that clutter, again, because, oh, I actually don't think I said this one. A common symptom of ADHD is also disorganization. So that's another reason that I keep my decks all in here is because it keeps them in one place. I'm not forgetful of where they are because they should be in there unless I move them. My decks for the week I keep out so that I see them, I'm not forgetting about them. And it also creates this thing of like, okay, these are my choices. Anyways, I was talking about, so when I start to build up all of these paper journals and notebooks, I perceive it as clutter and it starts to stress me out, which I didn't realize until I tried out a virtual tarot journal. So on my iPad, I have the Owl and Bones Tarot Planner. I'm going to pull it up to show right now. Right on here. So I use the Good Notes app, which I totally recommend because it's a one-time payment. It wasn't very expensive, but I know like Evernote, I think you have to have a monthly subscription. I'm not sure if you get like extra things with Evernote, but for my purposes, the one-time payment for Good Note is perfect. It uploads the PDF that this tarot planner comes as perfectly. You can add extra pages if I feel like I have more to journal, but otherwise you just get these kind of paragraph length entries, which for some reason this virtual option has worked wonders for me. And I do wonder if it's because I'm not spending time worrying about the clutter that I perceive physical notebooks has, which is such a shame because I love notebooks. I love getting new notebooks, but again, I tend to accidentally collect them and have them half used and end up with this pile of notebooks that I will never go back through. I won't. Where having this virtually, because it is all in one place, it doesn't feel cluttered to me. You can easily go through and see a grid view of all your pages so that I can like see all my pulls. Makes it so much easier for me. So I think that is something to try out if you haven't. If you feel like tarot journaling is overwhelming to you, and maybe it turns out it's not something that you are meant to do, which is totally okay. There's other ways to kind of record your readings if you want to, or don't, you know, and there's no right or wrong way, but I do think if it's something you're interested in, try different mediums out, because maybe you're already using a virtual journal and you forget to pull it up because you've got all these other things open. So having a physical journal that you keep on your desk will help you remember. You know, it could be totally the opposite of me, but that is something that has been super, super helpful in creating a routine. Kind of all these things getting mixed together, again, creates just this like perfect land for satisfying and working with my ADHD to create this little tarot practice for myself that brings me so much joy and fulfillment and is something that I stick with every day, which I don't think I've ever had anything I've stuck with every single day. I don't think I've ever created a routine where I did something every day. Interesting. This might be the first one, but I'm getting so, like, again, it's so fulfilling, and it took time to figure things out and stop beating myself up over some things that I was beating myself up over. That totally was because I just have this neurodivergent brain that I didn't realize. So I'm wondering, is there anything else that I kind of wanted to talk about? I didn't want to talk forever, and I realize I'm going in all different directions. I wanted to structure this a little bit, but I also kind of just wanted to have a casual talk about it because, again, I'm not a professional about this. I don't know everything myself. I'm still learning. It's still a bit new for me. So I didn't want to structure it in a way where it seemed like an infomercial because there's a lot I don't know. So I just kind of wanted to talk through my own experience and I guess just what's been working for me. So I think this time I went through kind of my routine with reading for myself, but I do think I would be interested to maybe go through some other tarot topics if that would be interesting to you all. Just to think about how maybe I've shifted things or could shift things to work better for me and my brain, because it's just been really fascinating to think about how I've come to shape this morning routine and how much of it kind of revolves around ADHD, which of course it would, because that's a big part of how my brain works, and you know, I need to play into that and see some of these things as the superpowers they are, because this is a random thought, but while learning new things takes a longer time, the ability to like hyper focus on something that brings you so much joy can be such a superpower. So again, don't beat yourself up over these things, because plenty of the ADHD brain is such a superpower, and I'm learning to see it that way too. So that was a random thought, but it just made me think of it saying that before. So okay, yeah, I think I'm gonna stop blabbering now, but let me know if you have any thoughts or even tips to share around like how you structure a reading routine for yourself, or if you don't have a reading routine and that works for you. Again, whether you have ADHD or not, I still think it's an interesting conversation to have of just what different things work for different people. So again, I hope it was helpful to just kind of purely hear my experience again, my experience entirely. I would be interested to hear some of yours, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.